Thank you for joining me to be the last and final interviewee for the series DeKalb Unknown. Could you tell myself and the audience a little bit about yourself to start off?
Okay. So originally I'm from Brooklyn, New York City. I'm a husband. I'm a father of two beautiful little girls. One is 5 and one is 1. I recently moved down to Atlanta about 6 years ago
Hmm.
with my wife. My wife is a teacher, and I wanted to get away from New York City because the high cost of living, and I wanted to
Yeah.
own a home, and I wanted to have some like ownership, and start off fresh in a new area. So while I was down here, I was actually offered a job with DeKalb County within the Human Services Department, Office Youth Services. And ever since, this is something that I have been passionate about my entire life. If I wasn't working with youth, I was doing something program related. Prior to having this role, I actually worked in Boston, Massachusetts, helping kids get scholarship money and also FAFSA money, to help them get to and through college.
Hmm.
And I always work with youth. I always had a passion to work with youth. I feel like they keep me young, they keep me inspired, keep you on your toes.
Yeah.
The world is changing so much, and just being around them just allows you to have a very unique view at life. So yeah, so that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Okay. So, what got you started in with youth? Like, what was your first job working with youth?
My first job working with youth was in a detention center. I went to go study. I was studying criminal justice, so I thought I wanted to go down that route and down that
Hmm.
path. So I worked at like a juvenile detention home. What do you call those things? Yeah, so a juvenile detention home. So I started working there, and then I
Hmm.
was like, you know what? My mental
It's not
space
funny.
my mental space wasn't really well because I seen a lot of black and brown kids coming in and out of the system,
Yeah.
and locking them literally up in cages. And while I was there, I was realizing like I'm locking them up, but I'm also in there with them. So I'm also kind of like locked up in a way as well. And seeing that wasn't really good for my mental health. So I worked at, so I then transitioned from the juvenile detention home to actually, like it's called a key program where kids were, orphans or adopted and had issues. So they were like in the
Hmm.
community, but they also had a particular home. I forgot the name of those spaces. I can't think of the name. So I started working with those kids. So it gave them like a little bit of hope before they actually got to the juvenile detention center. And then I seen how they put the kids on medication, kept the
Yeah.
kids on a schedule. And I was like, you know what? Now I want to kind of like get them before they get to get their space. And I want to say all of these jobs led me to where I'm at ultimately, because
Mhm.
having that perspective of like if we don't get to these kids early, this is where their future potentially could go. With life's obstacles in front of them. So yeah, so that was kind of like my start in youth development, youth working with youth in that space.
Since you have like first person experience with the school to prison pipeline from working in those areas, could you tell the audience? Because some people may not, we always say school to prison pipelines, but some people may not know what that is. So could you tell them what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the third grade, based on their reading level skills, they're building prisons. They're building systems or institutions to put these young men and women to kind of like feed this vicious cycle. It's also even like suspensions, like having a kid act up, having a kid be a little bit aggressive, or even just
Hmm.
having in the school all feed that vicious cycle of the school's prison pipeline. And again, I've seen that firsthand when you just feel like they can't manage a young boy's energy, then they are kind of like put into a space where it's just like they're becoming aggressive, and that stigma is put on them at a young age, and it only feeds a very vicious cycle. With all the obstacles that young boys specifically, because that's what I can relate to, and that's my perspective. Lacking that male role model, that male structure, that discipline. A lot of times they only really get it when it's either in school or in these institutions, these prison pipeline situations. And that's something I was just like, all right, this there got to be something that we can do on the front end to kind of like mitigate getting these kids to that particular point. And it's very sad. It's very sad because people say it, but until you see it on the front lines and you see it in action and you see it in motion and how efficient the system is, it's like, okay, this is bred and this is built to be like this. Yeah.
So what were some of your goals, and what jobs did you lead to that this led you to say, I want to stop, I want to get ahead of the school to prison pipeline to stop it in its tracks?
So initially it was a company in Boston, Massachusetts called the U-Aspire, where we were helping impoverished or even low income or even like Title I high school students get to community college. Hopefully, really get there without any student loans. And then from a 2 years of college to get to my 4-year college. So that's where it started. It was like, all right, cool. So let me see if we can get the kids through high school to college, and if they are proficient or if they have the skills, then they can kind of like fend for themselves. So that's where it started, and I love that job. But unfortunately, we had to move. My wife got a job, so I was like, all right, let's just go. So I ended up applying to DeKalb County, and then I've been down here ever since. And once I got enthralled into the work, it's been ongoing ever since. Like, my passion led me to become the division manager of the office, and also doing some really unique things within the community. Yeah.
So we as people, we tend to like focus on jobs and careers that would help our community based on what we experience as children, as youth. So could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and any like trials and struggles that you had to overcome that led you to where you are now?
Absolutely. And as I reflect as a 32-year-old man, I dealt with a lot of trauma. There's a lot of trauma with not having a dad. That's why I wanted to start my family early. That's why I wanted to be married. So it's all, I think a lot of my decisions, a lot of anybody's decisions is rooted in trauma and trying to kind of like go against it, try to fight against it, understanding where your weak points is at and saying like, all right, what can I do to kind of like not feed the system of trauma, but also, enhance it. So trying to be there for my daughter, trying to be there for my wife. I'm trying to be there for my family. A lot of that was deeply rooted in trauma. And a lot of kids that I was raised around didn't have dads, didn't have like structure. So we was just running wild. And again, you get to school and then you do that. And then it's just like, okay. And honestly, it wasn't until I started to play sports that I really started to like get that discipline. Honestly, like when the coach or the father figure was in my life, and they kind of like provided a level of structure, because you got to be at practice at a particular time. You got to have a certain grades to be on the team, and that was my incentive to kind of like do more. But yeah, that area is a very, very touchy subject, because I come from it. I see it, I feel it, I can understand it. And yeah, a lot of the stuff is rooted in trauma, and I'm still working on myself as a 32-year-old man. Speaking to therapists, I'm speaking to my wife about a lot in which I've seen and a lot that I've been through.
That's deep. So could you tell us some of your goals while working in human services to get ahead of the trauma that could impact youth in their future, to help the county altogether?
Yeah, my primary goal is to be collaborative with other people. But I feel like within this youth development space, we all have our tribes, we all have our specialties in what we do. And it's not until we all come together and realize, the common goal is for the youth, that I feel like, we're truly like triumph and have, a lot of well-doing, tax-paying citizens. And that's one of my goals. Like, I have no ego when it comes to this. This isn't my work. This is our work. and really collaborating with other people, doing things that we can't, because as county departments, there's certain things that we can't do that nonprofits or even business agencies can do. That's one of my, again, that's all I'm here for, you know, collaboration. If I have something that you need, I'll pass it along, and you have something I need, we pass it along, and that's how you can create a village, you know, surrounded for and by the needs of the youth.
Could you tell us what Human Services does as a department for our audience, just in case they may not know?
No problem. So the Human Services is comprised of a lot of things. So we have senior services, we have transportation, we have grants and administration, we have external partnerships and affairs, we have the Office of Youth Services, and we have about, I want to say 4 or 5 senior centers in the community. And when COVID-19 hit, you know, our department was directly rocked because of the age of people that we serve. We literally serve from 0 to 100 within our department. So we serve kids from 0 to 100, and those are the services that everybody needs. So it was like, you know, food relief. So we had to provide services for that. It was like, how are we gonna get citizens to senior citizens to hospitals and also doctor visits? That's when transportation kicks in. Now with everybody not having a large donor base, we had to provide resources for nonprofit agencies to kind of like get grants via DeKalb County. And for me specifically, you know, when the pandemic hit, we had to go from traditional in-person classes and we had to translate that to virtual, and, you know, going through those struggles. So literally our department does everything surrounding services for the human needs inside DeKalb County.
That's amazing. Could you tell us a little bit about like how it's been going and how you all have been able to partner with nonprofits to like give an extra boost to the community during this time?
So I'll speak to that specifically. So we have we have a program called the DeKalb Alliance on Youth, and when the pandemic hit, we organized with I want to say Georgia Piedmont Technical College to kind of like give nonprofits the information about how they can access the CARES funds. There was a lot of information, but, you know, a lot of times it wasn't the right information. So we organized a committee of nonprofit organizations to kind of like come and meet and talk about how they can best strategize to get these CARES funds to kind of like continue the work that they're doing. On top of that, we also hosted a virtual training where how can we go from in-person training to virtual and not kind of like be tied up too much into it. So what platforms do people use? What are some best practices that we can kind of implement to help the work continue? So those are the things that we gave the community, and also, you know, our grantees and nonprofit organizations in the community.
That's great, because it's always hard to find the right information during this time, since there's so much information going around and you don't really know what to actually take in and leave to the side.
Yeah, and your first question was, you know, how has the pandemic affected you? You know, so I got promoted in March.
Congrats.
And that's when the pandemic hit. So I thought I was going to walk into an office that was already moving and shaking, and literally everything, the landscape changed overnight for me. And trying to like really strategize about how is this virtual space going to transition. You know, the summertime, we really got to see it blossom. You know, a lot of the kids and a lot of parents are trying to get their kids into summer camps, which was closed. So we ended up having a large participation. I want to say we had about over 500 youth participate inside of our summer virtual village. We had like about, I want to say 40 classes that we offered over the summertime. However, in the springtime, we saw a decline because the kids were all virtual, the kids are on the laptops. And then you start thinking, are we doing something detrimental to these kids' health for being on these laptops? Because, you know, as I was growing, you know, get off the TV and go outside. Yeah. Now, these kids are literally on these devices for hours. They have cell phones now for hours. And it's just like, what health concerns are we kind of like putting these kids in? So a lot of our programming is geared to like fun, engaging, learning a new skill, to kind of like keep them engaged and also keep them sharp in regards to like extracurricular activities.
That's really good. So how do you, moving forward, and it seems like we may still be dealing with virtual learning, even though DeKalb County wants, the school system wants to go back hybrid. But like, where do you see DeKalb County and the rest of the world in terms of education and virtual learning in the next few years?
I think, and I have this conversation with my wife all the time, I think it's going to be a blessing in disguise. I think a lot of our systems were analog, like you got to do this, you got to be in person to get this kind of skill. I think the laptops are going to stay. I think the people who need the information, the youth that need the information, will have the access to the world with these laptops. Briefly, I know when the pandemic first hit, we partnered with an organization called Inspire EDU, and they provide permanent laptops to residents inside of DeKalb County. And like a lot of these kids, a lot of these families, a lot of these households didn't have devices, or if they did have devices, it was about 4 or 5 people working on these devices. So now we're providing, access to the world. If the kid has any questions, they can go to Google and figure it out. They can do their homework on Google at this time. And I just think that was a missing link inside of the world prior to coronavirus. And I think with some of the schools or colleges getting rid of the standardized tests, that was the different, like disenfranchising, minority people. It's going to have a large ripple effect in regards to like how we access different systems and how testing looks like, because they're talking about sending these kids back to school to do these milestone tests, and what does that look like? It's just a lot of things going on, and more conversation than normal about the system that was previously put in place and how it wasn't serving our youth.
Yeah, I hope that does change, because even with the youth that we work with, even though that sometimes they may be in 8th grade, they're still learning English. And so you having them take a test and they're still learning English, of course they may not do well. And then that has a negative impact on their future success. Yeah. So could you, we're wrapping this up in a few, but could you tell us some of your personal goals for your department, and how do you see human services in DeKalb County flourishing in the next few years?
I just see us, again, prior to the coronavirus, we was really expanding at a really rapid rate. And now, a chink was thrown in the system. And it's just like, now how do you reconfigure and be more innovative moving forward? And I can firmly say that virtual will remain, even when the world goes back. We have to access kids who may not have the resources to get to a particular location or community center. So we'll have a dual system rather than just a one I guess former system. So we'll have in person versus and combined with virtual. That will expand our reach within the community. We'll have spaces and laptops and community centers that actually can have these kids learning coding programs. That was another big obstacle. We had programs that kids didn't have devices to learn these new skills and these new ways of the world. And one of my biggest initiatives is always to keep the kids prepared for the next wave of technology, because technology is going to run the world. And if you don't know how to manage a system, or if you don't know coding, if you don't know the basics of these things, the world's going to kind of leave you behind. And just trying to see, all right, so this is the next trend that's happening. How can we set our kids up for success and even get the introduction level of information?
That's great. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for the Youth Services Partnership, and thank you for what all of you do in the Human Services Department. Could you tell everyone how they can get in contact with you all if they need any of your services?
Okay, so you can go to DeKalboys.org, or you can go to DeKalbCountyHumanServices.com, or you can reach out to me directly at jrwilliams@DeKalbCountyGA.gov. And I will be more than responsive to get back to you if you message me at any time. We have a team of 5 people working and doing some tremendous work for the community and ultimately for the residents of DeKalb County.
Thank you so much, Jashawn, for your time, for learning more about yourself, and participating in this video series for Black History Month.
It's truly an honor, and once I was told that you wanted to do it, I was 100% on board.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, you take care.
Have a nice day.
You too.